Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're watching Newcastle Fast FM. This is the Late Show Live. And of course, we're here every night from midnight onwards to speak to different people, to discuss different topics. Let me just set up my live link and then we're ready to go, inshallah. Tonight's going to be a good program, you know. I'm really looking forward to tonight. Partly because I'm going to be catching up with my old bro, man, from Riyadh after such a long time. I'm looking forward to this conversation. We got not one, but we got two Irish fellas in the room today in the studio.
Bring it on.
So I'm your host, Abu Tayyib. We don't have any co-host. We've got two guests instead. And my guests, let me introduce them. Number one, we have Brother Jerry. Jerry, how you doing?
Alhamdulillah, bro. Can't complain. All good. Yourself?
Very good, alhamdulillah. Very good. Looking forward to tonight's show, bro.
Indeed.
Especially when we talk about the history of Tawheed.
Yes.
You know, a history of Tawheed, basically, through other traditions as well. So that's going to be interesting on your part. And we have Brother Khalid Bari. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Abu Tayyib.
Or should I be saying Sheikh Khalid?
No. Thanks anyway.
Good. So, Khalid, let's start with you, man. I'm really, really excited. It's been a while since we spoke last. I enjoyed my time in Riyadh, man. Alhamdulillah.
It's a great place to be, or it can be a great place to be.
There was some good times when we were there. Of course, you were my training partner as well. How's your training going?
We did many workouts. That's right.
That's true. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so let's get the show off the road and let's start with the first thing. Brother Khalid, my brother, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit of background for the viewers. Let them know who you are, what you're all about.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. As you can see, my name's Khalid Bari. I was born strangely due to no fault of my own. I was born in Sweden. My parents later converted to Islam in a small village in Cork when I was about 7 years old. My father's Irish, my mother's English, from Preston. So I lived as a Muslim for a few years in Ireland, in Cork, and then in Dublin, and then moved to Birmingham when I was about 10 or 11, and then Middle East when I was 16. So I've been out of the UK for a very long time.
That's right. And it's interesting because you basically grew up in Islam from childhood, essentially, although your parents reverted.
I have always been the only white Muslim.
Alhamdulillah.
It's only recently, over the past 10 years, I've met so many others, you know. But I went to Pakistan. I went to Pakistan when I was 16.
Yeah, that's interesting. Tell us about that, man. Tell us about your adventure in Pakistan when you were 16 years old. How did you end up there?
Well, I left UK directly after my GCSEs.
Mm-hmm.
I went to live with my father, who was at the time working in Dubai. And I was very desperate to study Islamic studies. So I went from place to place in Emirates looking for somewhere to study. And sadly, in many of the Arab countries, they do not have facilities for teaching Arabic as a second language. So my father and a group of his friends decided to send me to Karachi to do a 2-year Arabic course. And then after that, the plan was to return to Emirates and to study in Ras Al Khaimah. That was the plan. But I ended up staying in Karachi for 4 years. And then I finally left Karachi when I was admitted into the Islamic University of Medina. So I went straight from Pakistan to Saudi Arabia.
And tell us a little bit about Medina, man. Tell us something that is something that really stood out for you at your time in Medina. Share a nice little story for us.
So many. I mean, Medina is a place. Even when I was a little boy in the little village in Ireland, my father used to read the Seerah to us at night. So me and my older brother, he would read the Seerah, mostly the Martin Ling's book.
Mm-hmm.
He'd just read like a bedtime story. And I always felt that I would live in Medina one day. And as a 7 or 8 year old boy in a tiny village in Ireland, I thought one day I will live in Medina. One day I'll live in Medina. One day I'll pray there. And I heard the stories of the mosque and everything about Medina. I knew for sure I would be there one day. So when I arrived there, I felt blessed. And mashallah, my apartment for the 7 years I lived there was about 10 minutes walk from the haram, from the Masjid Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So during those 7 years, I felt very honored, but I was never surprised. You know, I never felt out of place. I felt completely at home. It was such a lovely place, such a lovely people. So many amazing things happen. I mean, it's difficult to go through them all, but poverty was common, and that was a blessing as well, because poverty brings people together. We helped each other a lot. There was a lot of support, a lot of sacrifice. When you're rich, you don't really need to sacrifice because you've got things, you know. Like you give away, 1,000 riyals. What's that? £400 or whatever. You know, all right. It might mean that you can't take your wife to a restaurant a few times this month. You know, it's not a big deal. But when you know that you've got, £5 to last you a week or 2 weeks, and somebody gives you another £5 or whatever. I'm talking in pounds. Of course, it was riyals.
Of course.
You know, I remember once I was walking to the mosque. To this very quick story. I was walking to the mosque for Fajr, and my wife was very sick. I'd taken her to the hospital, and literally I needed 70 riyals to buy some medicine for her, and I didn't have any money. Right? Maybe I had like 5 or 6 riyals, like £2. So I was walking to the mosque, and a man who I'd met before, I didn't know his name. I mean, I'd greeted him before. Maybe I knew his name. I'm not too sure. But anyway, he walked up and he shook my hand. He gave me 200 riyals and he walked away. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't ask. And I had no idea. He shook my hand.
But just like
and then
that.
when he walked away, I saw 200 riyals. That's like £40, right? So I was like, wow. SubhanAllah. And you feel dua being answered there. You feel the blessings.
MashaAllah, that's amazing. That is amazing. I mean, most people, we go there to visit. We might spend a week there, 2 weeks there, 3 weeks maybe. But it's everybody knows when you go to visit somewhere, it's different when you're living there, right? Because you see different things, you experience different things, you meet different people on a different level. So it's such an honor, I guess, that it is to live there for such a long time.
For sure.
So how did you end up in Riyadh then, from Medina?
Medina, after I graduated, I had big daughters. My first 3 children are girls. So they had been to Saudi government school. So they were Arabic speaking. They were brought up in a very kind of working class Saudi way, not an upper class Saudi way. So just the thought of going back to the UK was just terrifying. So I thought, I can't bring them back to England. I can't put them in a mixed school. I just can't do it. So I searched for jobs in Jeddah. I found a job teaching in a school. Then I transferred to Riyadh, and now I live with my mother here in Riyadh. My mother was also a university teacher for many years here in Riyadh. So I moved here with her, alhamdulillah. Been here almost 11 years now.
MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. Okay, let me introduce my second guest, Brother Jerry. Jerry, how you doing, bro?
Alhamdulillah, bro.
Share a little bit about yourself. Tell the audience a little bit about your background, bro.
Okay, in brief, so I'm from Waterford City, the southeast coast of Ireland. I was raised as a Catholic, but I don't even know if I ever really was one, because I never bought into it and it never sat well with me. And at the age of 13, after asking a lot of questions and receiving no answers, and reading the Bible here and there for myself, I decided that this is not for me at all. So I read very briefly, and I mean very, very briefly, about other religions at that time, and I decided, they're all the same. I'm bailing out. So I became an atheist around about that age. Spent roughly 15 years upon atheism until the age of about 27. Got more and more spiritually empty. But something inside me was pushing me and telling me that there has to be more to life than this dunya. Like, however, whatever you have in the dunya, or whatever I had, it just wasn't satisfying me. And I tried more and more things, some good, some bad, looking for that satisfaction. I didn't get it anywhere, so I just said, right, I'm going to have to search for some purpose, for the purpose of life. I don't know if there is a purpose. If there is a purpose, I don't know if I'll find a purpose, but I have enough of living like this. So I then spent the next 4 to 5 years in between my atheism and my Islam. Because obviously when you research religions, when you research Islam specifically, you get all the anti-Islam arguments as well. Yeah, but because I was researching all of the religions together, I was able to knock out, I knew Christianity was false already anyway. I was able to knock out Judaism, Hinduism, Deism, Buddhism, even pagan systems and any of the philosophical systems. They were all quite easily knocked out, if I'm to be honest. The only one that hung in there for any other amount of time was Sikhism. But then I realized they nicked all the good stuff from Islam anyway. But alhamdulillah, at the end of that period, over time, Allah, He slowly and steadily guided me in increments, you know, until I realized then, yeah, look, after this 4.5 years research and everything that stands behind Islam, I realized if this is not true, then nothing is, man. So alhamdulillah, a few months later, I made my shahada in Kilburn with the Da'wah Azizi team. Yeah, that was in 2015, so over 5 years now.
Wow.
Alhamdulillah. That's amazing. You know, how did you end up in UK then, Jerry? What's the situation with that?
Oh, I ended up in UK long before I made the Shahada. I ended up UK in 2007, actually. So almost 13 years ago. Like I say, I was hacked off with life, to put it bluntly, for a long time because I was empty. You know, when you don't have guidance, you have no light, you have no purpose. And if you're someone that's really thinking, that's honest with yourself and that's honest with the world around you, I mean, you know, your soul has to cry at you that there has to be more than this dunya, this worldly life, whether it's money, whether it's status, whether it's your job, your family, whatever, man. So I was going deeper into what I thought was a hole. And at the time, I couldn't see any other way. I couldn't see any other way to describe it. But alhamdulillah, this was necessary for my guidance because Allah knows best how He's going to guide you, how, where, and when, etc. So I just decided I needed a change. I needed a change. And someone suggested to come over to one of my distant cousins here. And I did that in 2007. Continued on then until about 2010 at some stage when I decided to start my search. Because I realized as well, I used to take foreign holidays as well in the hope of kind of, you know, giving myself a boost and all that. But whether you're here, you're in Italy or Japan or Mexico, your problems don't go anywhere.
They don't. Very true.
Your mental state is still the same, you know. And so that was kind of what gave me the push to research, you know. Alhamdulillah, Allah guided me after the few years of research. So.
Alhamdulillah, shukrillah.
Yeah.
And now, mashallah, you're involved in dawah programs. You're actually calling other people to Islam as well. And
when I can.
opportunity to do, yeah. So tell us a little bit about some of your dawah work.
Well, about the stuff I'm on now specifically.
Just generally in like Leicester Square and other places like that.
Basically, after I embraced Islam, about a year after, I started to just venture out to the dawah tables, and I knew the locations because obviously they're on YouTube. They're all over YouTube these days. They're no secret. So I made dua to Allah that He sends me to the best company, and that happened pretty quickly. I got to know the brothers in Leicester Square. They were very friendly, very welcoming, mashallah. Brothers in Speaker's Corner, the same. Brothers in Ayr, the same. So I just started to go out whenever I could for a couple of hours here and there. Obviously, when you start giving dawah, you're a mess. You're all over the place. You feel good about it, but you don't realize your mistakes until you look back and think, you know, and you study a bit more. Alhamdulillah, you refine your knowledge and you refine your character, and you know, you refine your manners as well as time goes on. Still got a long way to go, but yeah, I'd like to get back out there, but unfortunately, we're locked up at the moment.
And of course, Khalid, you know, you've got a history of da'wah with your late father, rahimahullah. He was well renowned for doing da'wah, calling non-Muslims to Islam.
Alhamdulillah, my father had was very passionate about Islam, obviously. He worked a little bit in Dublin Mosque and then moved to Birmingham. Birmingham, he worked for the Ahmed Deedat organization. Then moved out to Bahrain and Emirates, working in what they call Islamic Information Center, dealing mostly with the foreigners there, mostly most of all nationalities, but a lot of Filipinos, a lot of Indians, dealing with those kind of people. So we had lessons in the mosque. It's amazing just just going back to what you're saying, Jerry, about how, we learn so much as we give dawah. It's also amazing how giving, I understand that knowledge is a prerequisite to dawah. That's true. But at the same time, there's so many people who have knowledge who don't give dawah.
So,
Right? So my father, when I used to come home from break from studying in Medina, Pakistan, he'd always say, all right, go and give a lecture. And I was like, I can't, I don't know what to say. I haven't prepared. And he was like, you spend all these years studying and you can't give a talk about Islam. What are you're wasting your time. And I'd be like, oh, I can't do it. So giving a talk to people you don't know, explaining Islam is a separate skill.
yes.
I mean, alhamdulillah, I can read Arabic, I can speak Arabic, I can open a book of hadith and possibly read it and explain it to people, possibly, if I'm prepared. But just to jump into talking about Islam to non-Muslims or to very weak general Muslims is not something I myself have learned to do. I'm not saying I couldn't learn to do it, but like my father, Allah yarhamu, he didn't speak Arabic. He didn't really know, he didn't memorize a lot of Quran and he didn't have a lot of knowledge. But as long as you give dawah within what you know, then your job. That's it. That's it. So as long as you're willing to say, as soon as you hit your wall, you say, I don't know. Right? And that goes for everybody, however knowledgeable, whether you're a mufti or whether you accepted Islam yesterday. As long as you're able to say, I don't know, when you don't know, then that's your duty. So you speak when you have knowledge and you be quiet when you don't have knowledge. So my father, Allah yarhamu, he was not very sympathetic to me not being able to give lectures. So I just get to it. So he had a television program as well on Sharjah TV. It used to be about 2 or 3 times a week. Sharjah is a very small state in Emirates. It wasn't like a big TV show, but he had it going for many years. So alhamdulillah, he gave a lot of dawah.
Alhamdulillah. And I think you've been a little bit too humble there as well, Mr. Barry, because I remember attending many a class in your front room where you would literally just open up a book and talk to us about stuff. Yeah. So of course you can do
the book was the important bit there.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, so we're going to talk. The main topic of tonight is basically there's 2 things actually we're going to discuss today. One is the importance and benefits of studying history, and also the history of Tawheed. I think they're going to intertwine quite nicely. So Khalid, let's start with you first. Benefits of studying history. What is the main points that you wanted to talk about for tonight with regards to that?
Well, first and foremost, we know that the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's revelation to us, has been split into, or the ulama have categorized it into 3 categories. The first is, so the whole of the Quran, every verse you read can be put under these 3 headings. Heading number 1, the oneness of God, Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Heading number 2, how to worship Allah. What is halal, what is haram. How we should please him, how we can stay away from his anger. Heading number 3 is the stories of those who obeyed Allah and what their results will be, and the stories of those who disobeyed Allah and what their result will be, and what their end will be. So that is the Quran, that is the stories of the Quran, that is what the revelation is about. So that's why they say, or that's why we have been told that reading Surah Al-Ikhlas is like reading a third of the Quran, because a third of the Quran is Tawheed, is Qul Huwallahu Ahad, is that there is only one God. Then a third of the Quran is halal and haram, a third of it is stories. So the stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned, they have been mentioned for an ibrah, they've been mentioned for a lesson. The point of reading the story is not to know that Musa lived in Egypt, and in Egypt there was a man who ruled and he was a pharaoh, and the Egyptians who followed, or the people who followed Musa are called Bani Israel, and there we go. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is to know that the people who worshipped Allah and who established Tawheed were saved, and in this life and the next. And the people who disobeyed Allah and who fought against the people of Tawheed, they were cursed in this life and the next. That's the point of the story. So history is to get an ibrah, is to learn a lesson. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قِصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةً لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ مَا كَانَ حَدِيثًا يُفْتَرَى. That in the story of these people there is a lesson for the people who have hearts, for the people who have open souls, for the people who want to learn the lesson. They will find the lesson, and the stories that we tell you are not a lie. So that's the first thing. We study history not merely to learn what happened and who did what, but to take a lesson from it. And the lesson from it may be unclear, but generally the lesson is that human beings throughout time act according to emotion, act according to the same emotions. Yani ancient people acted due to love, hate, and fear, the same as we do to this day. And also, another important thing which is lost on many Muslims is that history is not where we learn our understanding of our religion. History is where we learn what happened, not what should happen. Okay? You understand the difference?
Yeah, yeah.
So, our religion is based upon Quran and Sunnah and the understanding of the Salaf al-Salih. But history will sometimes tell us things that contradict our religion. Like we hear about people, great people, good people, who did things that are sinful. And our job is not to judge them. Our job maybe is to judge their action, to say that such a thing is haram, even though a great man did it. But our job is not to judge them, because people are victims of their circumstances more than circumstances are controlled by people. People are controlled by the circumstances they live in. So we're not to judge anybody. We don't look back. As Imam Ibn Taymiyyah said, he said the wars between the Muslims are, we are blessed to not having dirtied our swords in those wars. So let us protect ourselves from not dirtying our tongues speaking about those who fought in those wars. So that's the main thing about, that's the main benefit of studying history, is to learn, is to take an ibrah, to take a message from it, to learn how we can bring ourselves closer to Allah, or how we can reflect our own religion upon what happened in the past. And the other thing is that we don't take our religion from there. So when you're studying history, Islamic or un-Islamic history, or non-Islamic history, it's not so much a story of it clears up. There are some things that are around today that we think are ancient, but actually they're very new. And some things we think that are very new, but are actually very ancient. So this is one of the other benefits of history. It can give you a understanding of the society you're living in.
I mean, the interesting thing is, because we've had a few people on the show throughout this month, Dr. Steph Keris and a few other brothers who do specialize in history, and there's been many discussions on it. And one of the things that the conclusion that we came to is that, you know, as Muslims, okay, the non-Muslim curriculum in non-Muslim societies, it's almost like they've erased our Islamic history out of there. So they don't talk about it. There's a big gap in the curriculum, and we shouldn't expect anything better. But as Muslims, though, as Muslims, we seem to be really ignorant about our history, about who we are, about even from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and beyond. We seem to be really ignorant. Why is that? Why is there so much ignorance about that?
With all due respect to my Muslim brothers and sisters around the world, is the ignorance only on history?
No, more than that, obviously.
So, you know, sadly, there is a distance from our religion. That is the truth. Yani there are many people practicing without knowledge, and history as well, just like many people's version of Islam, is often very emotional. So when we might open up an Islamic history book, it's full of like these ridiculously heroic stories about one man taking on 400 and all sorts of stuff that makes you kind of frown and think, really? You know, I understand the Sahabas had some miracles. That's fine. We accept that. A miracle happened. Yes, no problem. But that's not the norm. A miracle, in fact, by its definition in Arabic is khariq al-'ada. Khariq al-'ada means something that goes against the norm. Yeah. So we know that Muslims, you know, history. Oh, another important thing is history is often the story of the most extreme. So history, you could say, is like a tabloid newspaper, or like a tabloid newspaper. So they collect the extreme and they put it up there. So, for example, even great histories like the history of by Ibn Kathir and by Ibn Athir and other great scholars of Islamic history, they'll only mention the exciting bits, the interesting bits. Like they won't mention the number of tahfidh, hifdh Quran schools that opened in a city, right? They won't mention the literacy rates. They won't mention how many people accepted Islam that year. They won't even mention much about the general scholars. They'll mention something about the famous scholars, but they will mention about revolutions. They will mention about civil wars. They will mention about executions, about conquests. So undoubtedly that existed. We're not denying that. But the other side of history was not mentioned. History was recorded as the extreme, the spectacular, the stories of the abnormal, of the great men, of the great wars, of that kind of thing.
So where does somebody start then, in terms of if they want to learn about their history and their understanding of their religion, and even get a sense of izzah from learning about their history and their past as Muslims? Like, for example, now there's that very big hit series Ertugrul, which has become really popular all around the world, and Muslims are going crazy, losing their minds over it, right? So, and it's given them some sort of honor and self-respect and all the rest of it. They feel good about themselves by watching these type of programs. So where does somebody start then in that case?
Can I say something about Ertugrul?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Apart from the many inaccuracies, but yeah, go for it.
Well, once we watch it, for example, if you watch an American film about American history, right? We understand that the connection to reality is pretty loose, right? We appreciate that, I hope. So likewise, if we watch a Turkish film about Turkish history, the connection to reality will be a bit loose as well. Of course, there's a lot of facts, a lot of truths, but again, highly dramatized. The goal is drama. The goal is not teaching. But as for where we start with the story of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We start with the companions, and we start with an understanding that what happened in history is not a goal for us to emulate. Each one of us must act according to Islam in our own situation as best as we can. So really and truly, history, although it can guide us, it can help us understand things, it's not where we find our religion. Our izzah should be in Tawheed, should be in Islam, should be in the glory of the Quran. The power of Islam above other religions is the power of Dalil. As you might know, the hadith talking about the لا يزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين على الحق. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ said, there will remain a group of my nation glorious and proud upon the truth until the last day. So the scholars have said this glory could be with swords and spears, or it could be with proof and with texts, right? So the glory doesn't have to be flying flags and marching armies. It can be scholars reading and writing and studying and spreading Islam. And I remember a nice story of a scholar of the Indian subcontinent. Sadly, I don't remember who, but he was talking about the British colonialism, and he said we had become slaves, or we were humiliated in the land. But if there came a Christian to debate us, we could debate them. So we still had the upper hand in our deen, even though we were humiliated in our dunya. So that is the glory of Islam. That's where we must get our izzah from, or else people will be constantly dreaming of a violent victory, and that might happen and it might not happen. But our duty is to do our duty according to Islam, not to force something to happen that we want. And that, I think, as we've seen over the past decade, is the sad case of many people who have tried to force a version of history upon themselves, a version of history who sadly have believed the anti-Islamic lies told about us. So the anti-Islamic historians will say Islam was spread by force and the Muslims are all violent. These people have been brought up in this education, in the un-Islamic education. And they've said, yeah, we're going to do it. This is the only way for Islam to become powerful. You know? And,
so it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it, basically? So it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy for many people, and they get brought into all of that sort of the hype, I guess, right? But okay, so on the one hand, you've got the anti-Islamic narrative and the distortion of our history as being something backward, savage, negative, and whatever.
Mhm.
But then on the other side of it, you've got people who are romanticizing our history, even overlooking some of the, how can I put it, some of the negative things that we've done in our history as well. So you've almost got like two extremes, haven't you? How do you deal with that?
100%. But the same is true of everything, Abu Tayyib. The same is true of every opinion. You have two extremes. There's no opinion that doesn't have the two extremes, whether it's communism and fascism, whether it's whatever. There's always two extremes. Walakin we are the Ummatul Wasat, we are the middle nation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described us as the Islam as being the middle path, neither extreme in our ignorance or not not the Jews and not the Christians. So we follow the middle path. And that is something we all search for. We all search to be well-balanced people on a daily basis. It's not a struggle that ends anytime.
And how do we argue, or how do we make the case and make the point, in your opinion, when we've got all this anti-Islamic narrative and people pushing a certain viewpoint about Islam as being really negative, even from our history? What's your advice to people to counter that? And because we claim, the Quran claims that we are the best of nations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you got people who show that actually the history of Islam is something different to that. What is your answer to that?
First of all, there's no such thing as the history of Islam. That's the first thing. Islam is Tawheed. Islam is Tawheed, and it started with Adam alayhi salam. And if we're going to talk about the history of Islam, it's the history of the prophets. It's the history of the following of the prophets. It's the history of the da'wah of Tawheed. That is the history of Islam. As for the nations that stood up, the revolutions that happened, the conquest, that is the history of the Muslims, not the history of Islam. Many things happened in the history of the Muslims which are shameful, which are wrong, which contradict the religion of Islam. Yeah, that's true. But the history of Islam is not the history of the Muslims, right? People are motivated by different things, motivated by greed, motivated by fear, whether they're Muslim or Kafir, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim. The motivations that push people to do extreme things are the same, right?
Yes.
But, however, I will just say that if we look at the history of the Muslims, there's a lot more to be proud of than there is, obviously, than there is to be ashamed of. So the spread of Islam was completely not how people imagined. And if you look at the way the Muslims conquered Iraq and conquered Egypt, they even built their cities outside the cities that were already there. So Basra, Kufa, was cities built by the Muslims outside of the city of Ctesiphon. Ctesiphon, or as it's called in Arabic, Madain, that was the capital of the Persian Empire. So when the Muslims invaded, they didn't force themselves into the city of the Persians. They built cities outside, and they lived their life, and the Persians lived their life. The same as in Egypt. Alexandria was Christian, and a little place called Qayrouan was built by the Sahabas, which is now a suburb of Cairo. So the Muslims lived separately, and Islam spread in the countries conquered or ruled by the Muslims the same way as it spread in the countries not conquered and ruled by the Muslims. Through dawah, through patience, through good manners, through time. And Egypt must have been majority Christian for hundreds and hundreds of years after the Muslims conquered it. It wasn't like Muslims conquered and then it was a Muslim country. Not at all. Quite the opposite. Muslims lived in their place and the Christians lived in their place, and life continued. And as you see, when a country like Spain was conquered by the Christians, the Muslims were eradicated.
That's right.
And countries like Syria and Egypt and Morocco and Iraq, the Christians are still there. The Christians who were there from before the Muslims are still there. Those who did not wish to convert over the years, they're still living there.
Well, it's quite contrary to what the revisionists of history, if you like, are trying to portray as Muslims in our history of being, like I mentioned, savage and negative and backward and all that sort of stuff. But actually, when you dig deeper down and you actually look at the history of the Muslims, you will find the vast majority And this is because of our religion, because of the Deen of Islam, which contributes to the way in which we behave, our behaviors, right? It's the foundations of how we behave towards others and fulfill people's rights, and through the fear of Allah, essentially, through the taqwa of Allah. That's why in most cases you'll find quite the opposite of what is being portrayed upon us today. Would you agree with that?
100%, yeah. Alhamdulillah.
Okay, good.
For sure. And the more we look into history, even the history written by non-Muslim, reputable, serious historians, we look at that, we'll find justice there. The proof is on our side, as always. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. We got a couple of comments. First of all, Maya B, that's my dad, right? That's one for you. And we've got another one from Muawiyah Tucker. Sheikhuna, my Sheikh Khalid. Yeah, I think he's all of our sheikhs, Muawiyah. He's
obviously referring to Gary there. Good man yourself.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, Jerry, that leads us on nicely to what you were going to mention, because we've talked a little bit about the benefits of learning history. We've talked a little bit about, making a very good distinction between what is Islamic history and what is the history of Muslims. So tell us a little bit about some of the things that you were going to talk about from your research that you've been doing. And I believe you're putting something together, compiling something on this very topic of, from your research of Tawheed in other traditions.
Yes, inshallah. I am compiling, but it's only beginning, and we ask Allah for help. Ameen. So basically, this is a deep subject. So tonight I will just scratch whatever I can scratch on it because of the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like Brother Khalid said, you've got two extremes on this. In this case, I would say two sides rather than two extremes. I mean, you've got a middle. You've got the Quranic claims, the claims of revelation, where Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Yusuf and others, paraphrasing, that Islam was the only religion that he ever sent to mankind. To echo what Brother Khalid said, it has been the religion of all the prophets and messengers. They all call to the Tawheed of Allah. And over time, as communities and nations deviated, Allah kept refreshing the message with more prophets, messengers, proofs, books, etc. So the Quranic claim is crystal clear on this. You've got the opposite claim. It's an a priori claim. It's an assumed claim that was assumed before evidence was assessed from the evolutionists, agnostics, and atheists, who say the exact opposite. They say the original religion of mankind could only have been something simple, like fetishism, totemism, animism, and the most prominent claim they have is animism, that mankind, while barely emerging from his beast-like state, he attributed a soul to himself because of things like dreams and seeing people die. Like while the body was still in front of him, something must have left the body to cause death, etc. Thereby, he reckoned that all the living things around him must have had souls, and out of fear, he started to worship them, and so on and so forth, and that mankind gradually evolved physically, mentally, morally, socially, etc., and religiously. So for evolution for all the gears of evolution to come together, it's basically impossible from an evolutionist point of view that mankind could have believed in one supreme, lofty being who gave a moral code and expected mankind to follow the moral codes and live as a Muslim, or anyone who believes in one God should live. Obviously, we believe Islam is the correct interpretation, but others still have moral codes and stuff as part of their religions. But to say this was beyond the early stage of development of mankind, because he was nothing more than a simple, frightened, marauding ape, so to speak. It's very denigrating to mankind. And then, look, in the middle, we have the historic testimony. We have the testimony from missionaries and explorers from tribes from all over the world, to the extent that this testimony is tawatir to the highest level. It's strengthened by all the other testimonies to the level where it's impossible to say they all made it up. We have archaeological evidence from civilizations, and we have common sense. So which does the middle point to? Does it point to the Islamic point of view, or does it point to the evolutionist point of view? And like I say, it's a deep subject. But to touch on things briefly, I'll just pull one quote from a scholar His name was Sir Monier Williams. He was born in India, you know, one of these highly educated Brits, and excelled in history. He was a polymath, multilinguist, etc. And he says it is not something worth knowing, meaning it should be obvious, obviously, because he was highly educated at the time. Most wouldn't. Even to us, after the lapse of 4,000 or 5,000 years, that before the separation of the Aryan race, before the existence of Sanskrit, Greek, or Latin, before the gods of the Veda had been worshipped, and there was a sanctuary of Zeus amongst the sacred oaks of Dodona, one supreme deity had been found, had been named, had been invoked by the ancestors of our race, and had been invoked by a name which has never been excelled by any other name. And then he goes on to say that the deeper you study the early civilizations and the tribes, the more you will see that they lived along the line of the Jewish children of Israel, because obviously they're the benchmark for the Christians. They think that's where true, like absolute moral code monotheism started. So that's basically how the evidence lines up, to be honest with you. I mean, you've got, we can jump to China, because China has one of the most obvious historical records and most extensive. Now, on the face of it, I will admit the evolutionist claim looks true, because it's propagated by mainstream media in schools, universities, and everywhere. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll see that there's diamonds underneath this dirt, so to speak. Before Confucianism, before Taoism, before Buddhism, the Chinese were worshipping who? Shangdi or Shangti, depending on how you pronounce it. And that translates as Most High God or Emperor above, depending on who translates it. Now, this is clear from the earliest texts, before the Confucian texts. Shangti was unportrayable. He wasn't the god of China. He wasn't some regional god. He was the god who created the universe. He was morally good. He gave a moral code. He was eternal. He was all-powerful. He was the judge of mankind, and he responded to supplication. This is from the earliest texts. And even with this, with the idea of Shangti, this is Tawatir as well in old books. It's from old scholars of Europe. They knew very well about this. And there was a big debate between the evolutionists and mainly Christians on the other side for about 50 or 60 years as to which side was correct. Now, there were, like I say, it's a deep topic, but there are much more examples like this. Suffice to say, look, you can split the way the scholars viewed mankind into two groups: tribal peoples or civilizational peoples. Now, if the evolutionist paradigm is true, the civilizational peoples should have been much closer to monotheism and much less polytheist than the tribal peoples, correct? Because they had advanced technologically. They're clearly more evolved. Lo and behold, you study Greece at its later period, you study Rome at its later period, you study China, Sumeria, or Egypt at their later periods, they're absolutely chock full of idols. So even the Bible says that Paul, when he went to Greece, he was sickened by the amount of idols there. So that was 2,000 years ago. Now, archaeological records from all of those places show one of three things: that the earliest records either show, as in China, they were monotheists. And the scholars have even said something similar to what the Monier Williams said. He said, it's not even a thing worth knowing that the early Chinese were monotheists. They say it's blindingly obvious from the earliest books. Or in the case of Sumeria, you cannot say they were monotheists from the earliest records, but they go from over 5,000 deities that had been worshipped down to between 3 and 6 in the earliest records. So they were still polytheists, but far, far less polytheist. Now, does that show us polytheism was on the incline or the decline? Obviously, it's on the increase. And there's a scholar called Arthur Custance who has done some very good work on this. Whereas Egypt as well, Egypt is a bit of a different example. We don't say they were clearly monotheists. Neither do we say they were less polytheist. We can say the following for sure. That there was a mix of monotheism and polytheism in the earliest records. All this animal worship and these bizarre hieroglyphic scenes that you see painted, these were largely out the window Yes, there were some polytheists, but there are some prayers and dhikrs and remembrances addressed with attributes that they're only suitable for the one true God, you know. And even the systems of shirk, that they fell into have been worked out by the scholars. And in the Quran, in the story of Yusuf, when the ladies cut themselves with the knives, yes, what do they say? They say, Hasha lillahi, which Khalid, you can translate it. I don't think it translates very well into English, but it's something like God save us.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
yes, exactly.
It's easier to translate by the reaction. Now, it's not clear whether these women were Muslim or disbelievers, but either way,
It's not.
it shows that some people in ancient Egypt did have knowledge of the one true God. Otherwise, how could they have said this? And this is exactly what the records say. You know, and like I say, we have names for Allah like Al-Qahar, you know, the overcoming, Al-Jabbar, the compelling, you know, Al-Aziz, the mighty, the dignified, the avenger. All of these are written in the Egyptian text in some way, shape, or form. Like I say, you have to dig a bit deeper, but these beautiful names of Allah you can find in some way, shape, or form there as well. So not only were the civilizations clearly more polytheist than the tribes, yeah, they were less polytheist at the least when you go back. Now it gets a little bit more interesting. Yeah. The tribes themselves were even less, they were less polytheist than the civilizations.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the points I was going to add, just jump in there for a moment. I remember having a conversation with you about this, that, you know, the Native Americans, for example,
Yes.
they in their history have a link to Tawheed. And we don't know whether it's been because of the interactions with Muslims or whether it's prior to that, but certainly in some of the belief system, they have things around Tawheed which they were criticized for by the Europeans when they went to America.
Allah knows best as the how and when. I think both of those statements are correct, but that's only from my own research. I think they've had a tradition from ages back, and I think they got influenced by the Muslims later on. There is another German scholar called Wilhelm Schmidt who wrote a 4,500-page book in German called On the Origin of the Idea of God. Now, this guy, he was basically doing tahajjud compiling this book. He was a linguist, anthropologist, a polymath, and he collapsed from exhaustion many times because he had to stay up all night compiling this book by hand. One of the areas he focuses on are the North and the Central Americans and the South Americans as well, natives. Now, he's come up with a method called the culture circle method. Majority of this method is still accepted today by anthropologists and historians.
Again, Gary, what's that called?
The culture circle method. Now, what it's for is this. It's deep analysis, and his work is not an easy read. Go ahead if you want to, but it's a technical read, but it shows you how deep these scholars were. Like this scholarship is not a joke, you know. They put serious effort into this. But the culture circle method is to work out which tribal cultures are closer to the ones who originally settled the land. And he has an extremely detailed method for this that I can barely even wrap my head around. So I'm not going to go into that, but that's what it's for. It's to work out which one of the tribes are closer to the original settlers of that land. Mm-hmm. Lo and behold, exactly the way it goes in the civilizations, it goes in the tribes. The ones who are closer, to the original settlers are much closer to monotheism, or they are monotheist. Also, they are much more, they are farther away from the stereotypical cannibal, boiling people in cauldrons and skinning people alive, mass media garbage that people put out about tribes. Yes, that did happen, no doubt, but the farther back you go and the closer they were to monotheism, the more they were involved in prayers to the one true God. Yeah, they had rituals like wudu. They valued marriage. They hated theft. They hated lying. They had severe punishments for adultery and blasphemy and all these other things, you know. Anne Schmidt has also done the same studies in various African tribes, Australian tribes to a massive extent. It's the exact same results. Every single Aboriginal tribe out of the hundreds of them, if you scratch the surface and you go to the people who met their elders, who lived with them, learned their language, gained their trust, will tell you, look, we worship jinn, what they would call spirits, we would call jinn, and we worship our ancestors only. Why? So they draw us closer to the name they use for the supreme God. And we can use the Qurayshi pagans as a benchmark. This is why they said they took the intercessors. Every single polytheist tribe gave the same excuse. And it gets even more interesting. There are men, sorry, Khalid, just give me 1 sec. It gets even more interesting because the way Allah describes the worship of the mushriks is testified word for word by scholars who could not have known this. Allah says when they set out to sea on a ship seeking His bounty, and the storm comes upon them, what happens to the jinn and the ancestors? Khalas, they go straight to Allah. The exact same thing the tribes do. Even it's reported that when they go on a voyage, the ancestor worship is gone, the jinn worship is gone. They pray only to the one God. And the same when they're in real trouble. You know, and just before I let you in, Khalid, the term polytheist is an inaccurate term. The term mushrik is far more accurate for ancient pagans, if we want to call them that. Why? Because mushrik means one who makes a partner. They all had some knowledge of the one God, even the polytheists, some more so. Yeah, and some have played a more relevant role in their life, but polytheist just means many God. When you look into this, you'll see that the terms Allah uses, like mushrik, is far more accurate because they had some concept of the attributes of Allah. They knew He existed, and they knew He was above all, etc., etc. And like I say, the worship of the ancestors and the jinn went khalas when they were in real trouble, and this is reported worldwide to water. Go ahead.
Yeah, Khalid.
Mashallah, mashallah. Well, two things I wanted to say. One is you know the Palmyran Society,
Yes.
who come from the city which is called in English Palmyra.
Yeah.
In Arabic, it's called Tudmur.
It's in Sham, yeah.
So it's in Syria, yes, in the southern part of Syria. So Queen Zenobia was a queen of the Arabic-speaking Romanized Arabs. So they were Arabs, but they had taken on the Roman religion. And it was one of the Prophet ﷺ's great-grandfathers who was the first man to carry an idol to Mecca. And he found it in Palmyra, in Tadmur, and he carried it back. And when the Arabs saw it, they were amazed and then they started making their own. So just saying in Sirah, we can look, I can't remember exactly how many generations back, but I guess it's about 5 generations before the Prophet ﷺ. So this man, again, as you said about the spread of polytheism and idol worship coming from the Greeks and the Romans, coming from the civilized, what they call them, city-states, coming from the city-states. So this is actually in our religion that we believe the first idol was carried from Palmyra and put outside the Kaaba, right? And again, as you said, not as a god, but as a
intercessor,
a helper, a supporter, so help us along, a blessed thing. Again, I want to ask you a question. What do you know about the representation of a deity in the idol form? Because I was reading something recently about how Buddha was never represented as a picture until after the time of Alexander the Great's journeys through Central Asia. And the first Buddha statues were Greek statues.
Yeah, well,
and
okay,
you know anything about that? Can you tell me something about that?
I haven't looked into Buddhism too much because it's pretty much lacking in Tawheed, even though it doesn't disqualify you from believing in God. But what I do know is Buddha was from India, and it doesn't surprise me what you said, because when you go and look at the statues on sale that are supposed to represent Buddha, he's portrayed as a clearly Chinese-looking guy with a big belly. So there probably are many
very first statues of Buddha, he looked Greek.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
In the Greek style.
I'm not surprised, yeah, because
and before Alexander the Great, they used to represent Buddha with a flower or with a circle or with some kind of symbol.
Yeah, I've seen that load.
Not as a human representation.
Yeah, I've seen that load.
So, mashallah, amazing. The history of shirk.
From the Chinese point of view, yeah, they started making Chinese representation of Buddha. So, but interestingly enough, like there are certain qualities of the one supreme God that the tribes were unanimous upon. Yeah, now they differed upon the qualities of the jinn and the ancestors and the rites, but they were pretty much unanimous upon that you could not portray the one true God. There was no idol of him. Yeah, and that he was all powerful, he was eternal, he was the creator of even all the other beings they worship and such and such. And it's interesting you mentioned the route of the idols from Sham to the Arab Gulf, Mecca, yeah, because there's another Christian scholar. I'm just finishing his book at the moment, but in the end, he talks about the Semitic nations, and he said pretty much exactly the same thing. He said the people of Sham, the people of Babylon, the people of Sumeria. He said these people were far, far more engrossed in polytheism than the more Arabs, if that term works, and the Yahud. You know, he said they were clearly engrossed in it before, and they degenerated before. So that even matches with what our tradition says about this. You know.
There's a couple of comments come through as well. The man who introduced the idols to Mecca, you were mentioning, Khalid, he was from what's that? Khaza'a, not Quraysh.
Maybe.
Okay, there's a
I
comment.
don't know. I'm not sure. I remember him being one of the actual grandfathers of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what I remember. Allahu Alam.
Allahu Alam. But yeah, so Jazakallah khair. I think that gives a nice overview of what we were mentioning about Tawheed and other traditions. And I guess the main thing that really sticks out for me there, stands out for me, is, you know, this is why we have to have, as generally as Muslims and as human beings as well, have to have a good understanding of Tawheed, so we can distinguish between, you know, other traditions and religions talking about Tawheed. They're having a belief in the supreme being, but then, and that's Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, I guess, but
Yes,
then
exactly.
understanding Tawheed al-Ibadah or Asma wa Sifat, because they can still, like the Quraysh, still believed in Allah, but at the same time they worshipped other than Allah, and they worshipped, you know, basically idols and things like that. So you'll find that in a lot of other traditions also, which makes the difference. So understanding Tawheed properly gives you that more comprehensive understanding of how we believe in God and how we should worship Allah. So I think that's the thing that stands out for me. But was anything else, Khalid?
No, it's just amazing what the brother's saying, what Brother Jerry is saying, this historical standpoint. You know, the more we read the Quran, this is another beautiful thing about history. We might read something in our text and think, oh, that doesn't make sense, or that's not right. But the more we learn about the world, more we find the world does not contradict the Quran. The world, as we might understand it, might contradict it sometimes, but that's a false understanding of ours. So as the brother was saying, it says in the Quran many times when talking about the mushrikeen, if you ask them who descends the rain, who brings down the rain, who creates life and death, who created the earth, they will say Allah. And then you say, Ala ta'qilun, do you not understand? Do you not see what you're doing contradicts what you're saying? So the shirk is always in the ibadah. It's never, or very, very, very rarely, in the rububiyyah. It does happen, but it's very, very rare. And then we might read that and say, no, mushrikeen really do believe in Zeus and Thor and this, but they're not the main god. They're sub-gods. They're sub-deities, not gods, deities of some sort. So that's why the importance of understanding the correct meaning of La ilaha illallah. There's nothing worshipped truly, or nothing worthy of worship other than the one true God. That is, as the Quraysh said, أَجَعَلَ الْآلِهَةَ إِلَهًا وَاحِدًا? Are you trying to make all the gods into one God? Like, are you trying to deny all these other gods just because of the one we already believe in? Allah, they already believed in, but they just did not want to disbelieve in their minor gods. And that is Tawheed.
Was there anything else you want to talk about in terms of the benefits of learning history and understanding history? I know you've got to go shortly for your suhoor and stuff, but was any other... You got time, yeah? Was there any other points that you wanted to make with regards to the importance of learning history?
Well, like I said, the importance is to free ourselves from blame. In many cases, that our religion stands clear. Our record, even if you look at crimes committed by Muslims, they were spoken out against in the time that they happened. So there's never a time where all the Muslims agreed upon doing something that was haram. There was scholars, for example, Ibn Kathir tells a story in Sham where there is a crusader raid in Egypt. So the crusaders, he calls them the Franks. The Franks attack Egypt and they burn a city, and they capture lots of slaves and they take them away. So the people in Syria, when they hear of this, they become very angry and they attack churches in Damascus, right? So Ibn Kathir himself says, I went to the Emir and I told him this is haram. These people are among our protection, they're in our protection, and they have not betrayed us in any way, and it's haram for us to harm them in any way. So the governor orders people not to harm them, but the riots are still going on. So it's a riot that was oppressive and unjust and haram, but it was spoken out against at the time. The scholars said, this is haram, don't do it.
Mhm.
So at the same time, even though it did happen, it's also Islam is free of it, because the Muslims who understood Islam spoke out against it at the time. And likewise, everything else we see. I'll tell you an amazing little story here. Maybe you like this one, Jerry. I was listening recently to the Ottoman History podcast. So you might have heard they're not in any way Islamic. I mean, their ideology is not Islamic. They're just historians. But they were talking about piracy. So many people who hate Islam, especially Americans, will talk about the Barbary pirates. Okay, the first war that America went into after the War of Independence was against the Muslims, against the Barbary pirates. Okay, you might know the Barbary pirates raided the village of Bandon, not Bandon, the village of what's it called? It's it'll come to me. They raided a village in Ireland. They've raided London once. Muslim pirates raided London. They raided Iceland. Okay, so pirates flying the Ottoman flag.
Yep.
Coming out of the harbors of Algeria and Tunisia, went and raided Northern Europe. Okay, so here's a story now. You look at that story and you think, oh, Muslims are terrifying. They're raiding Northern Europe. Okay, so there's a little question here. First of all, where did these pirates come from? After a little look into the history of it, 90% of these pirates living in North Africa, flying the Ottoman flag, were from Denmark and Norway.
Right.
Okay,
Viking.
Northern Europeans. The captain of the ship that raided Iceland was from Iceland. The captain of the ship who raided London was from London. Right? So these people had supposedly accepted Islam. We don't know whether they kept their Islamic identity after they lost their job as a mercenary pirate. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. But the point is, if you wanted to go on a slave raid from Algeria, what would bring you to London? I mean, there's a few stops on the way. Or what would bring you to Iceland? You know, they were going there under the Ottoman flag to take revenge for personal grudges they had.
Yeah.
Right? So they were in no way motivated by Islam, or motivated by the Ottoman Caliph, or motivated even by a love for plunder. Even that wasn't a motive. You know, they were motivated by their own individual personal agendas, right? Which nobody's free of, whether Muslim or Kafir.
Yeah.
So to sail a big ship, to sail a large sail ship with cannons, that was something only Northern Europeans did. So if a country in Africa or the Turks or the Algerians wanted large ships, they had to employ Northern Europeans. Just like if a Russian king wants horse archers, he employs Turks, right? That's just the way it is. You don't train people, you employ mercenaries who are already trained, right? So just to now, that little piece of information has changed the whole picture. So it's not Muslim Arabs raiding Iceland, but it's Icelandic pirates who happen to be flying an Ottoman flag. But they would have flown any flag if they'd been paid, you know, wasn't a problem, right? So it changes the picture. It frees Islam from an evil accusation that the enemies try to accuse it of. You know? That's
interesting. That opens up a lot of it changes the perspective a lot. It's also some Jack Sparrow stuff right there, by the way, when you talk about the pirates and all that.
definitely.
You know, but that's interesting. I've got a couple of comments here on my Facebook here. It's asking, what does Jerry know about the Irish families who have had 800 years descended in some ways from the Vikings, McCarthy, Moore, O'Donovan, O'Neill? Jerry, do you know anything about that?
You may well very be looking at one of them, but that's about the extent my knowledge goes now, because all the major cities in Ireland were actually founded by the Vikings.
Right.
Where I'm from, Waterford, Cork, Limerick, Dublin, Galway, and anywhere that ends in a Ford in Ireland or England was founded by the Vikings. So there's probably a massive amount of Scandinavian blood in Ireland. Well, there definitely is a massive amount of Scandinavian blood in Ireland, and it's not limited to those families either. I mean, if you look closely at the Scandinavian face and a typical Irish face, you don't really see too much difference, to be honest. You know, light skin, light eyes, light hair. And even when I listen to Scandinavians speak English, some words they have an Irish tint, or maybe some words in our language have a tint of their language. It's one way or the other. But yeah, there are a lot of similarities without a doubt. But that's
like Newcastle slang has a Norwegian tint.
Yeah, for sure.
The Geordie Punjabi, yeah. we got another.
Another thing is that the Vikings to Europe are like the Mongols to Asia.
Yeah,
They spread out very, very fast, and then they settled, and then they became the people they conquered. So the Mongols, for example, they ruled huge land, but they were never more than 10% of the land, never more than 2% of the lands they ruled. So within 2 generations, they had converted to the religion and the culture of the people they ruled, and then they just evaporated into the people. So likewise, as they say in with the Normans and the Vikings, they became Irish.
Yeah,
they spoke Gaelic.
Themselves were Vikings anyway, so
who had become French, but yes, Vikings, Francofied Vikings.
Yeah.
That's where you get the Barry name from.
And all the Fitz, any name that begins with a Fitz is Normannic as well.
Yeah.
In fact, my mother's surname is Normannic as well. So yeah.
Okay. Yep. So likewise, the Mongols with the Khan name spreading through Pakistan and India, etc. That goes back to the Mongols as well. Not that everybody who has it will have Mongolian blood, but there's a spread from it.
There's an influence on there for sure.
Influence, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Okay, good. We've got a few more comments that I'm going to quickly read out. One by Ariba Amanit. These shows and Newcastle Fast FM is one of my mains these days. Absolutely love these shows. Alhamdulillah. If you want to continue supporting Newcastle Fast FM and the Islamic Diversity Center, you can get some rewards in these last 10 days multiplied before the end of Ramadan finishes by giving some charity, supporting the work that we're doing, supporting the dawah that we're doing, and especially across the Northeast. You can do it in a number of ways. Go to supportidc.com if you want to make a one-off donation, or you can go to, if you want to become a supporter of IDC, go to idcsupporter.com and set up a regular donation, inshallah. And if you don't want to go onto the website, you can text Islam to 70085 from your mobile phone to donate £10 on a regular basis. So we like every charity, we need your support to continue these type of programs, inshallah. So another comment from Safi B. So interesting, mashallah, tabarakallah. Okay, good, jazakallah khair. Basak gives you the name, Khalid, of the person. It's more for me to read from here. Is it Umar ibn Lahi, maybe?
Amr ibn Luhay. So also our brother Muawiyah sent me a text. He said that the Prophet ﷺ said, رأيت عمرو ibn لحي الخزاعي يجر قصبه في النار وكان أول من سيب السيوب. So it says that I saw Amr ibn Luhay al-Khuza'i from the tribe of Khuza'a pulling sadly I don't know what qasabahu. I don't know what qasabahu means. Point is, I saw him in hellfire, and he was the first one who brought the idols. So that apparently shows that it was Amr ibn Luhay, not as I first said. Wallahu a'lam.
Muawiyah, Sheikh Bitcoin is asking you, Khalid, when is Khalid going to give us weekly lessons on the history of Muslims? Come on, Khalid, you got to sort something out.
Soon, inshallah. Inshallah. My YouTube channel, inshallah.
Okay, good. Jazakumullah khair. I think we're going to wrap the show up there, inshallah. So before we go, Jerry, any final words that you want to conclude on?
Yeah, I want to go back to this Ertugrul business. If you get Izzah from watching Ertugrul, you probably want to go and have a good chat with yourself. Because you can get Izzah from studying the names of Allah Azza wa Jal. You can get Izzah from reading the Quran and thinking about it. And if you spent more time watching Ertugrul than you have reading Quran, then you definitely need to go and have a good chat with yourself. And that's about it.
Okay. Khalid, any final words?
We are sadly a very desperate for entertainment. The culture of the world is desperate for entertainment.
We have to fight this. It's all around us, I know, but it's all garbage, man.
Jazakallah khairan. Yes. Compared to the truth, it really is garbage. Yes, undoubtedly.
Where did the law command you to watch 40 or 50 hours of Ertugrul in the space of 2 weeks or a month? You cracked in the head or what?
Khalid, any final words to conclude this program, bro? What are you going to say to finish us off?
The more you learn, the more proud you'll be of Islam. The more you learn, first of all, as Brother Jerry said, we take our knowledge from the Quran and the Sunnah and the understanding of the Salaf. Then after that, history comes only as a backup to know what happened, not only what happened, but what was recorded. Because remember, as I said at the beginning, that so many good things happen and they're not recorded. And then one murder or one revolution or one massacre, that makes the headlines. So the same is true in history. Hundreds of people accept Islam, hundreds of people learn to read and write, women's rights are protected, the weak, the orphans are protected, salaries are passed down to the descendants of soldiers who died in wars. This was always part of the Umayyad, part of the Abbasi, paying pensions to those, to the orphans, etc. All this is there. But what's recorded is a massacre or a revolution or a bloodbath, because that's what gets recorded. I would say one more thing, that Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, who's the main historian of Islam in his book Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, the beginning and the end, he always mentions stories in 3 or 4 ways. Not in 3 or 4. He mentions every story as it has been reported, right? So he mentions, for example, the story of, the attack on Medina in the time of Yazid. So he mentions one story that women were raped and houses were burnt and the mosque was attacked and all this kind of thing. Then he mentions the next story, much less extreme. And then he mentions the last story and he says there was a battle, the people who fought in the battle were killed, and Yazid's army entered Medina peacefully. Right? So he said, I don't know which one of these is true, but this is what has been reported. So the point of the story is that whatever happens in history does not change our aqidah. Right? So we know that the army of Yazid were Muslims. So the thought of them destroying Medina is obviously a bit too much for us. Right? And if they did, then they are sinful Muslims. But we imagine that they didn't do it. Right? So history does not change your aqidah. What changes your aqidah, or what you should get your aqidah from, is the Quran and Sunnah, and that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to say. Jazakallah khairan.
That's an amazing way to finish off. That sums it up quite nicely, actually. So we're going to wrap up the show there, inshallah. And we'll be back tomorrow evening. Who have I got tomorrow? Oh yeah, Abdul Haq Kufi. Kufi's back with us tomorrow, inshallah.
I'll be there on distance.
Inshallah.
In the comments. I'll be there in the comments.
We're going to be talking about defining legends. So we'll be discussing that tomorrow, inshallah. So that'll be an interesting discussion. So Jazakumullah khair, boys. Thank you very much. It's good to see you all again. Albeit
Allah yahfadak wa baraka feek. Jazakallah khairan Abu Tayyib. Nashkuruk. Thanks a lot, Jerry. Very nice meeting you, man. Allah yahfadak.
Accept it from us. I mean,
we'll be back tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Don't you just hate it? Every time you switch on the TV, scroll through Facebook, or read a newspaper, it's Muslims have done this and Muslims have done that. They're barbaric, this religion is dangerous, etc., etc., etc. The saddest thing is that so many people out there believe it. It's people like you and I who need to dismantle these misconceptions by showing how beautiful Islam is. If it wasn't for such amazing dawah organizations out there, many people wouldn't be Muslim today. One such amazing organization is the Islamic Diversity Center. For over 17 years now, they've been building bridges within communities and calling people towards Islam through education, awareness, engagement, and empowerment. Their amazing work has resulted in hundreds of people accepting Islam and thousands more understanding that Islam is not about killing and murder. Rather, it is a peaceful religion full of understanding, harmony, and worship. In order to continue guiding the masses, they urgently need to raise £50,000. That's just 500 people donating £100 each. Now, as Muslims, if we can't sacrifice our time and resources to call people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then at least we should sacrifice a tiny percentage of our wealth, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. Please donate £100 today and earn Sadaqah Jariyah on your scale of good deeds from now until the end of the Day of Judgment, where your only hope of entering Jannah is through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Please, lastly, hit the share button. Wajazakumullahu khair.